Hey, it's Mia here. I'm popping into your ears again because I want to share with you a very candid conversation that I didn't have, but that I think everyone should listen to. If you are a fan of this podcast, No Filter, you also will be interested in another podcast we have here at Mamma Mia called Tiddas for Tiddas. We launched it just a few weeks ago alongside Kamilaroi and Dunghutti woman and the founder of the Tiddas for Tiddas movement, Marlee Silva. Tidda means sister. And on season 1 of this podcast, Marlee's spoken to some incredible Indigenous women about their lives, from actress Leah Purcell to lady startup Christy Dickinson. She has some amazing conversations, and it's not just a podcast for Indigenous women, it's a podcast for anyone who is interested in hearing stories of Indigenous female excellence. This conversation is particularly special because Marlee's guest on this episode is 22-year-old activist Vanessa Turnbull Roberts, and she has the most incredible story that everyone should hear. I literally could not move when I was listening to this podcast. I was doing some cleaning in my house and I just actually had to stop and listen. It was so incredibly powerful. Here's Marlee and Vanessa.
This episode of Tiddas for Tiddas was brought to you by Belong, offering simple mobile and broadband plans with no surprises.
The time has now come for the nation to turn a new page. A new page in Australia's history by righting the wrongs of the past and so moving forward with confidence to the future.
If you Google the stolen generation, chances are it will be defined as the removal of Aboriginal children which occurred between 1905 and 1967. But what if I told you that the stolen generation never really stopped? That to this day, Aboriginal children are still being forcibly removed from their parents. Would you believe me? Or would you assume that with Kevin Rudd's apology in 2008, it was all okay? Yama. Marlee Nagaya. From Mamma Mia, I'm Kamilaroi and Dunghutti woman Marlee Silva, and you're listening to Tiddas for Tiddas. Tidda means sister, and in this podcast, you'll get to hear the stories of a handful of our deadliest Indigenous sisters who are out there working to change the world one day at a time. Growing up, 22-year-old Vanessa Turnbull Roberts had a very different childhood to other kids. From the moment she was born, a caseworker appeared at her mother's bedside, and in the eyes of government institutions, her future was decided for her. Then, at 11 years old, she was taken from her mob and her blood and pushed into the foster care system. Including being told by one foster parent not to tell anyone she was Aboriginal, there's a lot of trauma from those years that Nessa had to face on her own. But rather than let it hinder her future, she's turned her life experiences into passion and energy to make change for her people. An activist, a law student, and a writer amongst so much else, Vanessa is a powerhouse. As is the case with so many of our people's stories, this conversation will be confronting. It will make you uncomfortable in your privilege. It may challenge your beliefs. But that's what the truth feels like. That's what it should do. Be brave, Australia. Listen to learn and start walking with us. This discussion does include talk of suicide and depression. If you find any of the content unsettling, reach out and talk to someone. Call Lifeline on 13 11 14. Now over to Vanessa.
My name is Vanessa Turnbull Roberts. I'm a proud Bundjalung Widjabul woman. So my family come from mid-north coast New South Wales. So that's Lismore, Cabotry Island, and half my other family come from Redfern and La Perouse region. I'm a Roberts. I'm related to the Kings, the Carrs. If any of their relations, figure it out. Yeah, that's my family.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of what is a very busy schedule that you have at the moment. You're studying, you're in your honours year at UNSW, and you're about to undertake your thesis writing, which I can fully empathise with. How are you feeling about that at the moment?
Really nervous. The choice is there now, which is, you know, with a lot of blackfellas, a lot of us thought we wouldn't make it past primary school, high school, yet alone being in university and having the opportunity and choices that are about to come. And I'm really nervous about narrowing it down and what I want to write about. So
I'm sure it'll be phenomenal. And the great privilege that we do have in pursuing this tertiary education is we have all of that resilience running through our blood and all our ancestors standing behind us, cheering us on, just as you mentioned. And when you talk about how there are times when you think it's impressive that I even made it through primary school, let alone all this way. Maybe it would be a good time now for you to talk about what it was like growing up for you.
It was really tough. I went to a primary school where half of us didn't have much at all and the other half had too much. Coming from the culture that we stem from, you have 50, well, we both have 25, we have half-half. And so being in a primary school setting where the majority of the other half didn't know how to share or work with us, I found that really, really difficult to comprehend as a young person. I've written about it before, and I've just recently started sharing a bit of my story about being forcibly removed at the age of 11. That was something that really impacted where I was going to end up and what I was going to do. Being a kid, growing up in primary school and having a lot of your school teachers say to your parents, don't worry about looking at too many different high schools, she's probably not going to make it past year 9, was something that I found really hard to comprehend, because I knew that rhetoric was happening behind the scenes because of the way they put the work in with me, which was very limited. As a young Indigenous woman in primary school, which happens to a lot of our young Koori kids, going through school is that a lot of our teachers settle with the Ds or settle with the Cs. And we're not the Ds, we're not the Cs, we're the As. We are what we say we are. And this settlement of where we tell black kids that that's how much they're worth, and yep, we'll get the extra funding and we'll get the extra tutoring and we'll do this, and then we settle that this just sets the bar way too low for what we are made of and what we can achieve.
I think that's so indicative of what our education system is like at the moment. It's that the bare minimum is enough because that's the expectations that they have around us kids, So the stats still stand that our kids are more likely to see the inside of a jail cell than a university hall, and the mere fact that we got into the positions both of us are in at the moment is like we're defying the odds, which is a crazy thing to think about. So as all good interviewers do, I did a very thorough stalk of you on the interweb.
Oh, no.
And I found this quote that I'm just going to repeat to you now, and I think it would be great if you could maybe tell us a little bit more about that experience as a kid in the foster care system, especially when something like this happens. So the quote is, I was really confused at one point because I had a foster carer tell me, when you go to school, don't tell people you're Aboriginal because they'll treat you differently. So in that case, were you living with people who were non-Indigenous?
Yeah, so just going back a little bit, at the age of 11, I was forcibly removed from my father for falsified allegations of neglect. Many policies and many processes broken. When I did go into the foster care system, I was placed in non-Indigenous homes, and these homes, some good people and the majority really unsafe people. And that quote that you just read, when you go to school, don't tell people you're Aboriginal, that came from a non-Indigenous foster carer who wanted to make sure that he wasn't questioned about his identity either. As a young person, when I heard that in the home, I was confused because I came from a community and a culture and an identity where you are strong in who you are, you represent who you are, you feel who you are, and you be who you are. Hearing that confused me as a 12-year-old young person because I've only ever known those things. Going to school and being forced to hide my identity was something where teachers knew through my actions, my values, my morals, and my strength. No, she's a black fella, she's Koori, you can just tell. And going back home where they were like, no, don't tell anyone that you're a foster kid because they didn't want to stigmatise me or treat me differently, was one of the hardest things that I remember hearing as a young person in care, because it was questioning everything that I am and everything that's only been at the core of me.
Yeah, that identity journey is something that all of us go through in different ways, and you can feel so strong about who you are. And this is the thing that I feel, and I wonder if you feel the same, is, when you don't look like that, Tourism Australia image of what an Aboriginal person is, or you meet people who don't think you're black enough, like on a visual level. I remember being quite young and just not being able to articulate, like, you don't understand how black I feel. And it's such a, I think, confronting concept for people who live in a world where everything's about appearances, really. And it's not about that. It's about how we connect to each other. It's about how every other black fella I meet feels like family to a certain point. Like, that's stuff that people just can't get if they're not with us. So, I mean, I just can't even imagine what it was like to be told to hide that at such a young age. And your story is reminiscent of the stories we are told that seem like they should have been a long time ago, you know, in what we now refer to as the stolen generation. And in a lot of your writings, you talk about the fact that that's never stopped.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can maybe reflect a bit on that now. And you're very prominent as an activist for kids in care now. And what's that look like, particularly in New South Wales right now, for those kids who are away from family?
Yeah. You know, you said it, Marlee, and that's just it. The stolen generation has never stopped. Assimilation has never stopped. Oppression, genocide, looking at the rates of our kids committing suicide, it has never stopped. And it's never stopped since the first moment of invasion. This stolen generation is continued in our policies. This stolen generation is continued in the action. And this stolen generation is continued when we just take a look at the rates of incarceration and we reflect on why those people are in those places. Just recently, in November, we had the forced adoption laws go through. This removes parental consent and can place our children, if they are in the care system, for 2 years in forced adoption up to 18. This same rhetoric and this conversation that is going on is the exact same dialogue that was happening when missionaries and White Protection Board officers put out those policies saying, no, we need to whitewash these kids, we need to take them from the families, we need to raise them the way we're raised. I think it becomes alarming when we reflect on the stolen generations, and I'll say that in inverted commas like it's happened and finished, but it hasn't finished, is something that we talk about as the past. However, we just have to look at the numbers right now and see that they have tripled since this happened.
So, Vanessa, you have a unique connection to this whole rhetoric now. Could you paint the picture for us of what the stolen generation that's occurring right now looks like in Australia?
I think it looks like the young people with mental health issues. It looks like our young people in the juvenile justice system. It looks like our brothers and sisters and them in the incarceration system. It looks like our kids feeling lost. Again, we talk about the stolen generation as if it's an act that occurred in the past, but it's an act that has never stopped since the first moment of invasion. It's an act that happened to me personally, and it's an act that is happening to our brothers and our sisters and them all throughout our communities. Young people are being removed for falsified allegations of neglect, which was similar to me, and instead of government putting funding in, preventative strategies and resources in communities, there seems to be this immediate intervention and removing these children and then placing them in all these different homes. The stolen generation is something where when we look at between, let's say, 2008 and 2020, that's around my generation of being removed, we're going to be talking about that being the continued stolen generation. And then 10 years from now, we're going to be talking about the stolen generation happening then, because this intergenerational trauma that we as Indigenous people are facing is going to be passed down. For example, in my circumstances of being able to be at university, to be studying a law degree and doing social work and making sure that I'm doing absolutely everything in my power to give back to those young people and children who, just like me, probably didn't have their voices heard throughout that system, some of those kids won't even have the opportunity to know that they are even Indigenous, because we have things like the forced adoption policies and laws that have just been amended come through, which place those children up until the age of 18 in the out-of-home care system. And I say this to so many young people that I meet on the streets, or I meet at protest, or I just meet, through an online message. They say, how do I know who I am and where I'm from and where do I go and what do I do? And that's a really tough thing to answer, because the system has placed them in that position in the first place. The system has placed them in a position where they don't have a home address anymore, so they're suffering homelessness. The system has placed them in a position where, they might have to go and steal something to get some food for the night. Before you know it, they're arrested, they're locked up, and they can't get bail because they don't have an address, or because at those young stages they were removed from their family and their home and their community, and now they're struggling with identity, which is one of the most important things. We as Indigenous people are connected to each other, connected to our kin, connected to our brothers and sisters and them, and we will always have that connection. But when we reflect and we look at For example, the suicide rates that have just occurred and have been occurring for many, many years since invasion, if we reflect deeper, I would like to speak to those children and ask them, who did you feel like you could go to? What was your background? What was your story? And with many of us and our kin and our aunties and our uncles and our brothers and sisters, we might have someone to go to. But for a lot of these young people, they don't. When we place those kids in out-of-home care, and for example, we pushed the recent amendment that just got pushed, which was the adoption laws, up until 18, who are they going to go to? So many of our children are being taken at a young age, home to home. Now they have the potential risk of being there until 18. They hit 18, and then where do our kids go after 18? Because more than likely, our children are kicked onto the streets and become a number of the state. A number of the state. I would like to know and see a study, where are our children ending up after the age of 18? Personally, I've never been contacted by fax. I've never been checked on. I'm 22 years old. I left the system only a few years ago. I left that system because I was in a racist, abusive foster home that I didn't want to have anything to do with anymore. And I had an incredible sister girl who said, "No, I'll move down from Rocky and we'll do it together." Wow. That's why I'm here doing what I'm doing. But for many other kids, they don't have that. For many other kids, they do end up in juvenile justice. They do end up in adult wards. Like, this is a system that is literally built to institutionalise our children and young people. And the stolen generation has never stopped. It's still continuing. It's happened to me. It's happening to my brothers and sisters. And instead of early intervention and prevention appropriately, or just maybe leaving families alone and letting us do how we would do it, which would be through community and kinship, they want to intervene. And, you know, I've said this example before, and I'll say it again. The moment I was born and the moment, you know, my mother, sacred, beautiful woman, suffered from mental health issues her whole life, and my father, a dark-skinned Aboriginal man, the moment they both came together, all these different intersectionalities of just what they were facing, the moment in that hospital and I was born, and my dad has always told me this, the moment you were born, Bub, and I appeared at the hospital, a caseworker was there. A caseworker was there the moment I was born, pretty much saying, we're going to be here to take your child at some point. And they are there, and they use this rhetoric, we're here to help you and support you. We didn't put our hand up for help and support. We have our aunties and our uncles and our family and our kin. We have that support there. And yet they came in and they intervened, and it took them 11 years to remove me, to find something wrong. It took them 11 years. And nothing was even wrong. And they would have known that had they represented my rights, my voice. And even through that system, whether it was 15, 16, 14, actually took the opportunity to ask me, hey, Vanessa, are you safe? Hey, Vanessa, do you feel okay in this home? Hey, Vanessa, do we need any changes? Every time I complained about either an abusive home or something not being right, it took them months and months and months to action anything, and it would just be the same cycle. This system, the stolen generation, it hasn't ended, and we actually have a responsibility to apply more pressure, because the one thing that gets things done is the people power. And we know that firsthand. We know that firsthand because we can walk in universities, we can walk into a cinema now, we can swim in the same pool, we can walk into the same bars. It doesn't mean that we're free from racism. Absolutely not. But the fact that we have those opportunities is what our grandparents fought for, and they fought for. For most of us and for most black people, it's not about what we can achieve for self or we can achieve for ego or anything. It's actually about what can make our great-grandchildren's lives safer, so they aren't targeted, so they aren't arrested, so their parents aren't profiled at the hospital the moment they are having children. That's what it's about. And this stolen generation and these forced adoption laws where parental consent and autonomy is removed is a prime example of how we're moving backwards. And I'm all about moving backwards, but move backwards to the way my people lived, to the way we worked. But don't move backwards to the pain and the oppression and the genocide and the assimilation that white people are continuing to do to our people. That's where we have to draw the line. And we have to call our people power to come together, get out on the streets, protest, reach out to your brothers and sisters. If you're feeling lost, I've met so many people out there just randomly on the street, and they're like, I'm just feeling really lost and I don't know what's going on. And, you know, when you're connected spiritually and you can feel that spirit and energy in the person you're speaking to, you say, well, who's your family? What's going on? And they say, well, I don't know my family. And then they're like, well, actually, I was a foster kid. And then you explore a bit more deeper with that person you're speaking to, and before you know it, they actually are Koori, but their whole lives they were told that they can't be Koori, and now they're lost. And that's why when I see the rates of suicide and I see the rates of incarceration and I see the eco-genocides happening, I see our kids losing that identity. But identity is the one thing that will save us. And it's the one thing that's actually going to save Australia.
Wow, you're so right. And it is horrific to hear that literally from the point that you took your first breath, your quote-unquote future was determined for you by the state. It's horrific in so many ways, and especially when those sorts of institutions position themselves as things that are meant to be there for the protection of children. I wonder then, because the stolen generation has never stopped, do you think that something like Sorry Day is kind of a point where it's trying to cement in the psyche of the rest of Australia that it is done? Like, is it just a reaffirmation of that? Like, that it's done, it was awful, I don't know, like, let's move forward or something? Because if it's never stopped, saying sorry should be a continual sorry and a continual pursuit of righting the current wrongs as well as the ones in the past.
I think it's fair to say they haven't even corrected the past wrongs at all.
Exactly.
You know, we've said it before, and I'll always say it again. Sorry means you don't do it again. The same year that Kevin Rudd said sorry is the same year that I was removed. And then 10,000 other young children were removed as well. This reconciliation, this Sorry Day, these NAIDOC events, all of these things that are happening is all to make the white person feel good about themselves. But you don't get to feel good about yourself when this is the past and it's actually the present, and when our future is ending up where they are, you don't get to feel good. And you have a responsibility to start actioning your behaviour if you want to feel good. You need to actually check in with your Indigenous brothers and sisters. You need to check in with your history. You need to learn the identity of Indigenous Australia if you actually want to be apologetic. But apologies where, you might, say you're woke or whatever the cool thing is for whatever the cool thing is that white people feel great about. Yeah, I'm a part of NAIDOC, or I'm all for Sorry Day, or I rocked up to the protest, I'm deadly, I'm this. You're not deadly unless it's your everyday action. I just wrote that piece yesterday and I said, reconciliation, we are more than the 7 days. We are more than the Sorry Day. We are 300, how many days in a year?
365.
Yeah, we are 365 days in a year, first sunrise and the last sunset, and we always will be that. We always will be those things. And it's time that we actually think about these days and think about what are we doing to make sure that this is in our everyday behaviour. This is something that we want to make sure we're creating a safe space for our Indigenous brothers and sisters that are around us. The onus is not on Indigenous Australia to make non-Indigenous Australia feel inclusive, because the moment non-Indigenous Australia invaded Australia is the moment we were the most excluded from each other, excluded from the land, and excluded from ourselves. So they have a responsibility to right their wrongs, action their wrongs, and when they think of these days, think of it for being that whole year and the next year and the next year and the next year. Because until we start seeing things like the rate of Indigenous kids in out-of-home care, when we're 3% of the population but make up the majority, until we start seeing the rates go down of incarceration, and until we start seeing our women supported at every single level that they can be, because our women are the healers and are the extraordinaries and are the fiercest, until we start seeing that, then your sorry means nothing. Reconciliation is too late, and you're not so woke. You need to really think about your behaviour and educate yourself. Yeah.
There's some truth bombs there.
Yeah.
And it's something that people need to think about, especially like you probably experience this as much as I do. It comes around to these like 2 weeks of the year, as if we're not black every other day, and non-Indigenous orgs come out of the woodworks and they want you to be at their breakfast and to do a speech and to tick a box and whatever. But there is a way to be genuine about it, exactly as you've explained. Like, my thing when I think about sorry is like, I always say that sorry is like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches, right? It's a long thing and it has to be followed up with action. More in a moment, but first, a message from our sponsors. Belonging isn't about fitting in. It's the freedom to be yourself and connecting with people who matter. It's amazing the connections we make when we talk. Belong. Together we're different. All Belong mobile plans have data banking, which means you never lose the data you don't use. Save it for the future or give it away to friends and family who have active Belong services in Australia. Let them know that they belong. Check out Belong's mobile and broadband plans at belong.com.au. Actually, I want to ask you about this because this is something I felt last week. Oh, no. Like, because, and you did write this incredible article yesterday that we'll talk about in a minute when we talk about the mental ill health crisis that we're seeing. But you're a writer, I'm a writer. We put ourselves out there. We tell our stories on a lot of different platforms and mediums and things like that. I found myself at one point last week going, oh my gosh, I'm really vulnerable right now because my face is in the paper. I'm in 4 different media outlets, and I was in a video with Brooke Boney talking about sorry, and I did a dumb thing and I read the comments on the Facebook video, didn't I? Stupid, fatal error,
Yeah.
don't ever do it. And I just was like, oh my gosh, like I'm completely exposed here. Anyone can rip at me for looking white or whatever. So I guess like because you write a lot as well and you put yourself out there a lot. I think it's because we inherently have this need because we have a voice to be able to bring light to things. But how do you look after yourself? How do you look after your own well-being? And are you good at kind of saying, hang on, stop, let me just step away? Because I'm trying to get better at that. I'm not very good at it, but
That's the golden question.
yeah.
Yeah, you read the comments. Biggest error.
I know.
That's the biggest error, girl. No, I think the saddest part is that when we put truth out there, that there are people that would rather target you as an individual and the person you are rather than actually talk about the issue in itself. And it's this whole, everyone wants to be called racist, but no one wants to talk about racism and no one wants to go in depth with these dialogues and talk about the harm that it's doing. A friend of mine told me the other day that people actually get paid to troll. So I'll send you the article that I've been reading.
God.
People are actually out there in these places going out there to troll people like us when we're going and putting our truth out there and actually questioning what's going on in this unjust society that we're in right now. Moving on to your next question, what do I do personally? I think that's where I open my arms and I am vulnerable and I feel that literally in my heart when people are targeting. But I open my arms up to safe people, and you pick your people wisely. You pick the people who you can go to and pick up your phone and say, hey, this has really, really impacted me. Can we talk about it? Can we have a yarn? Can we check in with each other? Self-care, being connected spiritually and talking to that safe person is the one thing that will not only heal the nation but heal us when we're putting out that work. It's so important to make sure that we are okay as individuals first, and then we can help other people. The most important thing I find with when you're out there and you're being vulnerable is that there can be quite a lot of adrenaline in that moment, and then it's slowly going to pass, and it's going to be yep, that was last month thing, and to white Australia that's just last month thing. Reconciliation, like that was last week. We did all the black stuff. Yeah, we're cool now. We've ticked the box, but for us, that was our truth and our vulnerability and our honesty put on the table so that these people who want to just put it in the past can actually go and have that access and read about what is going on or can gain some type of understanding about what is going on. With non-Indigenous folks, they can just go to sleep at night and not even think about the stuff that we have to think about, not even comprehend what we have to live every single day, what we have to face when we're walking down the street and we see a black brother or sister who is homeless, and the guilt we feel just as other Indigenous people that see our brothers and sisters on the floor like that, on their land where had that building not been there, that would have been a tree, or that would have been a village, or that would have been the King's or the Queen's place. But because of gentrification and because of this space, they are the homeless and the most vulnerable targeted person in Australia. And I think it's important for us not to stop because that's what they want. I've always said it, the only justice we get is the justice we demand. And one of our ways of demanding justice is through advocacy, activism, writing, podcast, resisting in different ways that many of our other brothers and sisters are resisting as well. We have incredible black scholars out there. We have incredible black lawyers, black med students, black producers, incredible black elders who hold the highest and highest of knowledges that none of these institutions could ever teach us. And we cannot stop that. We cannot stop that because that means that person who's targeting us on that media source wins. It means that their ripple effect of their racism is winning. And they don't get to win. They don't get to win because we have to keep that fight up and keep that strength up because it means that might be 2 generations down, 3 generations down, 4 generations down, depending on how these white fellas act on climate change. Yeah. But depending how far we go down, it might mean that one day our children can walk through the street and not be judged on their complexity or identity or targeted by state intervention. And that's why we have to keep doing it. And it's going to get tough and it's going to get harder, but reach out to those safe people, reach out, connect, go out to country, breathe, and just know that when you're walking ahead, it's not just you doing it alone. You've got thousands of ancestors that are with you this whole way, and they are guiding you and they are protecting you. And I guarantee that person online who's wrote something terrible to you, they saw you in person, would collapse at their knees, because that's the spirit that we have as First Nations people. It's not a privilege to be speaking the truth, it's our right to be speaking the truth. And it's just a shame that not many people want to hear that, because it's white guilt and it's confronting and there's trauma on both sides, and that worries people.
I'm so glad now this is recorded, so every time I feel like that, I can just listen to your inspirational talk and it can lift me up, because I think that it's at the core of our resilience and at the core of what's been, we've been able to survive for the millennia that we have, is our connection to each other, which I think is quite unique to our culture. Is we can't survive without our other people. And I think, this might be a good time to dive a little bit deeper into this mental ill health crisis that we're seeing, because I think it is reflective of that disconnection. It's reflective of us feeling incredibly lonely, so many of our babies, and when we talk about suicide, it was a concept that wasn't known before invasion. It just didn't exist in Australia, in our culture, in our traditional ways. And, there was a Senate inquiry that was done into the Kimberley region a couple of years ago, and what it found was that every element of intergenerational trauma, every case of depression, every case of suicide is directly linked to the point of invasion. And that's something that people don't want to know, and they want to kind of blame all the stereotypes that we are still thought to have in our communities and things like that as to why a 12-year-old decides that they don't want to live anymore. And you did write this incredible article yesterday kind of reflecting on that, and I know that it's something that's personally affected you, but amongst all the other amazing things that you advocate for, how do we fix this? How do we surround our young ones or our people who feel like this? So I don't want to see on my Facebook page every couple of weeks some other young brother or sister is gone. It's a crisis. What do we do?
It is a crisis, and I wrote it yesterday in the piece, and when everyone's celebrating, most of us were mourning the loss of those we love, and mourning the way nobody should ever leave this earth. Suicide is not a way to exit the earth, and you mentioned it did impact me personally, and I'm quite open and raw about speaking about it, because I don't want, just like you just said, I don't want to see our brothers and sisters and them just knowing that is a choice, not even a choice, because when you get that point, it's not even you have autonomy to decision making about what is going on. That is just the only thing that is available. I think I lost one of my best friends and my dear loves to suicide, and I lost my mother to suicide. The process of losing my mother, it could have been prevented, and it was a failure of services that didn't act. I won't go into too much context because it's going through a legal process at the moment, but we need to show up for our people. We need to show up for each other. Our kids, I can't speak on the lived experience of being in a rural and remote community, but I can speak about the pain and the darkness that can prevail inside when you feel like you have nowhere to go. 3 hours towards Walgett, there's not even one support services out there where kids can go and say, I need to be supported. And then you just look to the other side and you see the river drying up, and then you see the community not have access to their fish and their water resources and what the eco-genocide is doing to these communities. And then you really realise that when the land is dying, that we're dying. And we have protected this land for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, that now that, climate change is impacting where we are today, we're seeing our children literally be born, the moment our kids are being born, they are suffering from the intergenerational trauma and then raised in a society where they are targeted by the state, then they're subject to racism, and then they're suffering depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, psychosis, all things that, you're right, it was not here prior to invasion. Joe Williams has said it before, and it's one of my favorite quotes that he's always shared. We would have 5 to 10 psychologists around a fire to talk about things, to talk about what was going on. And these days, we are lucky to have a formal professional intervention at least within 3-4 months to see someone. And I think it hits home, obviously, because of my personal experience with suicide and it being so close. But when you hear that children under the age of 15, 12, 10, 8 are committing suicide and Australia just doesn't even blink, I get worried. I get really, really worried. And, the perfect example to talk about how suicide does not discriminate, but the response discriminates. And a perfect example, and may she rest in peace, that young, incredible woman, Dolly, who did take her life, that caused a national crisis. Everyone intervened. People donated money. People fundraised. People wanted to step in and support that family. We've had 77 people commit suicide in 5 months. That's 2 suicides a week. 2 black suicides a week. And no response, no nothing, no community jumping on to donate money, no how can we support community-led long-term solutions. And this is a crisis in itself that nobody wants to respond to our kids. And it's what we've said, Black lives do not matter in Australia. Black lives do not matter in Australia because unless you're white, unless you're privileged, unless you're any of those things, our kids' lives do not matter. And that's exactly why we have to keep talking about it and we have to keep fighting and we have to make sure that another kid does not die by suicide. Another example, when everything went wrong with the farmers and how they changed the process of the waterways and took all the water and then we ended up in a drought. The world, the country, the ministers, they responded. I would open up my banking app and it would be donate to farmers. It was a national response. But yet places like Gingy and the Nemoi River and the Murray-Darling Basin has no water. Fish are dying, literally, coming up to the surface, which would be our way of surviving, and there's no response. And when the land dies, we will start to die. And if we really want to protect this nation, we have to heal our First Nations. And it's not by Reconciliation Week 7 days a week. It's not by a sorry day. It's actually by targeting poverty. Poverty is not a crime, but for some reason in this country, it's a crime in the eyes of the state. And then poverty leads to mental health issues, and mental health issues leads to suicide. And these kids deserve people to show up, deserve someone that they can go to. We all need a big brother, a big sister. We all need someone that we feel safe to go to. And this intergenerational pain of where these children may have felt like, at the point of taking their life that they couldn't even pick up their phone and just call an auntie or an uncle, that's a massive concern in itself because that is the prime example of intergenerational trauma being present, that they could not even go to someone they knew or loved or trusted because that's what they were feeling. And it is not those families, those communities, they are not to blame. It is colonialism to blame, no support systems being out there to blame, and it is the fact that we, Australia, would rather turn our back and just avoid the problem because it's not in front of our eyes, rather than actually come together as a community, which cultural ways we will always find a way to come back together, but white Australia would rather not turn its back and say, hey, how can we help? And I know a lot of people, they may be listening to this podcast and being like, oh, she's just targeting like all these white people. What is she doing? What is she doing? Truth is, the majority of white Australia do not care about Indigenous Australia. Don't get me wrong, I've got incredible non-Indigenous brothers and sisters. My auntie Anne, who I live with, she spent most of life working in legal aid with communities. I adore her to bits. She's a white woman. But the majority of white people don't have that same process of responding. And that's where it needs to change. Start using your privilege for good. Start using your privilege when you see a person of colour or someone with a disability on the street being held up by police. Just go and stand next to them. Go stand next to them. And if the police say, what are you doing here? You're obstructing justice. Like, oh no, he's my cousin. Or no, I'm just standing here. Because your presence could be the difference of him dying or not. Your presence could be the difference of him being thrown into the back of a paddy wagon and then being taken to incarceration and then dying. Start showing up, because this is a national crisis. And those kids and those people who have taken their lives, 73 being under the poverty line and 3 being homeless, that's not right. That's not on those families and communities. That's on us. That's on our governance. That's on the system that was built to fail us. And those kids every day deserve to be recognised for their fighting strength. That they got as far as they did going through what they did. Because I can guarantee they would have been fighting demons in the process that led to that. And we really do have a responsibility to be there for our kids and people.
Yeah, I'm almost speechless because you've just articulated it so eloquently. And I think I quite often talk about it as being like, when we talk about moving forward and fixing a lot of these things, we talk about that 80% of the population that are indifferent, who don't see the issues that are really threatening our existence as their own. And that's what I always say. When you hear a story about a young Aboriginal person deciding to take their life, you should be losing sleep over it, just like we are, because this is something that impacts the whole country. And as you said, so true, that in order for us to build a better future for everyone who lives here, you have to start with us. You have to start with the people who are here first. And yeah, just the way that you talk about everything's connected, how we are owned by land. Like when people talk about traditional owners and stuff, I think they get confused because the land owns us, it owns our stories, and when it's impacted, that impacts us. Thank you so much for the way that you've just been so incredibly raw and honest and told the truth in this whole conversation. It's really inspiring to me, and these are the kinds of conversations that feel like healing for me as well, and it's such a privilege to be able to have them, especially in this way, where I hope that this conversation is going to reach people who wouldn't hear it otherwise, you know, both of, you know, our own mob who need this healing as well, and the rest of Australia who wants to find a way to do better. So I guess to finish up, if you've got any final thoughts, if you've got any message that you want to leave anyone with, here's your time.
Here's my time. I think, you know, my final message will be to non-Indigenous Australia, and that will be wake up, educate yourself, remember the land and the laws that you're walking on, remember the buildings you're walking into, remember the workplace that you have, remember before these buildings were here, before gentrification came, that they were lands, trees, oceans and waters that were safe and protected. And as I mentioned before, when you see homelessness and our brothers and sisters who are subject to that unjust behaviour, think about what you can do to actually step in, be a healthy ally. Don't try and talk for us or about us, but rather share with us and know what is going on. If you're one of those people who say, I'm just not into politics, I'm not about that, or you're saying you're not into Black lives, because we are on the receiving end of every single policy that goes out there. From the Northern Territory intervention that still exists today, that is seeing our children stripped away from their families and then placed in places like Adelaide and New South Wales, and then our kids just in New South Wales being shipped away from their families, placed on the other side of the country. Think about what you can be doing. Think about how you can question the fax worker. Think about how you can step in and advocate with us. With us. Not for us, with us. We are 3% of the population, and yet we are the most targeted 3% of the population. And we are continuing to fight every single day, demanding justice for the lives, bodies and lands that they have taken. And as a non-Indigenous person, you are accountable to that. You do benefit of the structures and oppression that your ancestors committed on my people. And you have a responsibility to show up. Show up for the suicides. Show up for the people dying in custody. Show up for the kids in care. Show up for the policies that dehumanise us as people. And show up for any single person out there who needs you.
If you want to hear more from Vanessa, follow her on Twitter @TurnbullVanessa. Thank you for listening to Tiddas for Tiddas. If you like this show, please share it with someone you know and leave us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts. If you want to see more from Tiddas for Tiddas, follow us on Instagram by searching Tiddas for Tiddas. Tiddas for Tiddas is produced by Eliza Ratliff and Amelia Navasquez. I'm Marlee Silva. See you next time. This episode of Tiddas for Tiddas was brought to you by Belong, offering simple mobile and broadband plans with no surprises.
If you want to hear more extraordinary conversations like that, we've put a link in the show notes of this episode. You'll have to go and subscribe to Tiddas for Tiddas. So in your favourite podcast app, wherever you're listening to this show, go and search Tiddas for Tiddas. The 4 in the middle is a number 4, and you spell Tiddas Tiddas, number 4, Tiddas. And you might also want to follow Marlee Silva on Instagram. She is awesome.